All right, Eric, well, joining us now from Washington is Eric Broyles. He's an attorney and is the author of Encounters with Police, A Black Man's Guide to Survival. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's start with rule number 1 in your book.
Sure. The theme of our book is to comply now and contest later. It's very simple. We believe that there's a proper time and place to seek redress for what you feel is improper police treatment, and it's never at the time of the encounter.
So why did you feel the need to write this book, Eric?
I actually wrote the book with a young man that I mentor in mind. He is an 18-year-old boy who has lost both of his parents. And I think about, he's a teenager, and so sometimes he can be sassy or talk back. And I wanted to write a message to young people like him in particular to give them a way to think about police encounters in order to help them to leave those encounters safely. I wanted them to understand what police work entails, and I wanted them to understand that there's oftentimes imperfect information from both the police and the citizens. And I wanted to deal with this, there's a sense of sort of despair, anger, and frustration within the African American community. And I wanted to give, in particular, again, young men a proper forum to place that anger and frustration. You can engage in a fight with rogue police officers. You can never do it on the spot. And I give them tools and a practical guide on how to engage in this fight in the proper and most effective way.
Are you doing any sort of community workshops with this book, Eric, to get the message directly to the folks, the kids, the young men who you are directing your message to?
I do speeches almost every weekend for the last 18 months that the book has been out, yes.
Does it disturb you that you felt compelled to have to write such a book? Here we sit in 2016.
Yes, it is. It's ironic that I wrote this book. It is out there, and I didn't write it to I really wrote it as a guidebook to just a group of boys that I mentor, one kid in particular. But yeah, it is a sad statement on things in our society that a book like this is even necessary.
And I believe you mentioned, Eric, that part of what your book is teaching or trying to teach the young men to whom this book is aimed, that police work, you're trying to teach them also what police work entails. Talk to me a little bit about that part of the message.
Yeah, I think whenever you look at some of these encounters that go awry, I think you have both a communication gap and an understanding gap. I use as a case study a situation where I was driving in downtown D.C. in an expensive sports car and was pulled over and surrounded by officers with their weapons drawn. When I went to file a complaint, I learned that the police officers were looking for an African-American male with a silver two-door coupe. Now, that night, I told myself a bunch of stories about how I was being racially profiled and all of the bad things that happened that night. But then when I went again to file the written complaint, I learned that they had good reasons for being cautious, because a gentleman, African-American male, had just shot someone in the head, and the only information the officers had was that he was an African-American male in a silver two-door coupe. And so I used case studies like that just to give a different perspective in the hopes that you can reduce the tension, that we don't go into these encounters telling ourselves stories about how bad police are or how bad this can end up for me, but leave the possibility that it can be a peaceful interaction at the time of the encounter.
How do you think that message would resonate in Charlotte, North Carolina tonight?
Well, look, emotions are running high because people are frustrated and angry. So I understand that, that the message, it may not resonate right now, but I will tell you, having spoken on this topic, again, almost every weekend for the last year and a half or so, the message is well received, and people and young people receive it, and they it's almost an aha moment. What's going on in Charlotte and in other places is really, Dr. Martin Luther King said that violence is the language of the unheard. And many people in these communities feel like they're unheard. And one of the key things I try to do in this book is to give them a way to communicate and to express what they feel and how to bring about change. It's not just a book about black men putting their hands on the steering wheel. It's about how do you file a complaint? How do you complain to the Department of Justice? How do you engage in the political process to make real meaningful change? And so it's really those tools that I think empower people to make them less likely to engage in some of the violent protests that you've seen occur, not just in Charlotte, but in other cities around the country.
Well, of course, you had the shooting, the fatal shooting of 13-year-old Tyree King in Columbus, Ohio. You had Terrence Crutcher in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, when these stories continue to make headlines without blaming police or the suspect, or unfortunately in these cases the deceased, the person who was fatally shot. You know, how do you get that message across? I mean, how do you convince some of the very young men that you're trying to talk to try to, on some level, trust police and understand what police are dealing with, and try to understand how to approach the police, or how to just answer that? I don't want to add any more. Go ahead, answer for me.
Yeah, it's gonna take a lot of work. Look, and this is a shared responsibility. Both communities, police departments have a large responsibility here, and citizens of all stripes have a responsibility here to just try to have understanding. And one of the themes of my book is empathy, but also forgiveness. I think you see violence and you see these things when you're steeped in unforgiveness. And I'm not saying that people aren't justified to be angry at what's happened, but if you just tell yourself a story about how bad things are, it's hard to move beyond and get into constructive actions to actually bring about real and meaningful change.
Eric Broyles, we leave it there. Tell me one more time the name of your book, sir.
Yeah, the book is Encounters with Police, A Black Man's Guide to Survival.
Eric Broyles, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Very well said. Thank you. Well, coming up as the protesters continue, we are now about 45 minutes away from the city engaging in that citywide curfew. Will the demonstrators continue through the night? And also we're going to look at what that cell phone video that we saw, what that could tell us about police procedure.
Our special coverage continues. Stay with us. Some breaking news coming out of Burlington, Washington, where police say 4 people have been shot to death at the Cascade Mall there. Police say the shooter left the scene before police arrived. They're clearing the mall now. Again, reports of an active shooter at the Cascade Mall in Burlington, Washington. This is about an hour north of Seattle. Again, we have this 4 people shot to death at the mall, 4 confirmed deceased in this shooter, and we are following this story. The shooter is on the loose, or shooters, we're not sure yet. This is very fresh information, a fluid situation there, and we will continue to follow this for you in the state of Washington.
Well, back to our top story, the protests in Charlotte tonight that are ongoing. And of course, the disturbing video that was released today by the family of Keith Lamont, who was taken by his wife, Rakaya. It depicts a troubling and tension-filled scene as police repeatedly order him to drop his weapon. Reports say about that gun, police say they found on the scene. The reports tonight say it had DNA, blood, and Lamont's fingerprints on it. But since the country witnessed this gripping real-life drama by watching this video, what can we tell from it from a police point of view? Rod Wheeler is with us now. He's a former Washington, D.C. homicide detective and Fox News contributor. So, Rod, you've seen the cell phone video.
That's right.
Clearly painful and riveting, but from a police tactic, strategy perspective, can you break it down for us?
Absolutely. You know, the police were serving a search warrant. Actually, they were serving an arrest warrant on an individual. So they were there with the intent to arrest a person. The person that they were looking for apparently had taken off before the cops actually came across that person. But Mr. Scott was on the passenger side of a vehicle at the apartment complex where this whole thing went down. So when he started to get out of the vehicle initially, he had the gun in his hand. And that's when the police first started telling him, Eric, to drop the weapon, drop the weapon. He got back in the car, and then that's when his wife, and we can hear this on the tape, that's when his wife started saying, you know, don't do it, Keith, don't do it. And then the volume increases in her voice, and then we see that the police officers decided to use lethal force because the guy got out of the car with the gun in his hand. Now, this is after, and I underline the word after, multiple requests by the police to Mr. Scott to drop the weapon, drop the weapon.
Yeah, you can hear on the tape maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 times drop the gun. The family says it was a book.
Right. Yeah, and you know what? And, you know, here's the thing. In real life situations, that happens. You always have family members that's going to say something that may not necessarily be true. And that's because that's their loved one. So we understand that, Eric. But at the end of the day, we have to investigate the situation for what it is, whether it's good or bad. And in this particular case, unfortunately, Mr. Scott lost his life. Nobody wants to kill a person. Mr. Scott lost his life, but it was only as a result of the actions that he took.
And some people look at this and say, could police have retreated somewhat?
No.
Is there any? Can they take cover and get a conversation? I mean, she did say he had a TBI, traumatic brain injury. You don't know sometimes what you're coming upon.
Well, not only did he have a TBI, but he also, according to the wife, had just taken his medication. So, you know what I'm inclined to believe, real quick? I'm inclined to believe that maybe his brain injury, maybe the medication caused this guy not to think properly, caused him to do some things that he would not have normally done. Unfortunately, though, as police officers, Eric, we have to address the situation as it is at that time. We can't retreat. All the police officers know at that time is that they want the guy to drop the gun. Look, cops don't want to shoot anyone. And you know what? I don't know if the viewers know this, but one of the worst things that a cop can ever do in his or her career is to kill a person.
Yes.
So the cops don't want to kill anybody.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I got to stop you there. We're up against the clock right now. We will be right back with more of our coverage.
All right.
We're continuing our coverage of the protests tonight and the shooting. Rod Wheeler is with us. Rod, we were discussing police procedure. Could they have retreated somewhat, or does this happen so fast because we can see it in real time?
No, you know, we're not really trained to retreat, because if there's an active threat, and there was an active and immediate threat by Mr. Scott keeping or holding that weapon, Eric, the police had no other alternative but to use lethal force. They obviously tried very hard, very diligently to get this guy to put the weapon down, and that's why we hear not just one, but two police officers begging him literally, please put the gun down. He refused to do it. So, Eric, in this particular case, there was nothing else that the police officers could have done but use lethal force.
Yeah, we're learning more about Mr. Scott. Family says he's a family man, married 20 years, of course, 7 children. But he also has apparently, you know, an extensive criminal record, maybe a dozen or so arrests. He had served 7 years in prison. In 2002, the New York Times reports that he shot a man in San Antonio, Texas, was charged with, aggravated felony assault. Now, the officers, if they appear on the scene, they don't know this, do they?
They don't have any of that information, especially in a situation like that situation in Charlotte the other day. Remember, the police was there initially to serve an arrest warrant on another individual, but then that's when they came across Mr. Scott, who had the gun in his hand. Even Mr. Scott's wife pleaded with him, don't do it, Keith, don't do it, Keith, and he did it anyway. He got out of the car with that weapon, and again, the officers had no other alternative but to use lethal force. You know what I was saying real quickly earlier is that police officers, they don't want to shoot anyone. It's one of the worst things you can do in your career personally, to have to take someone else's life. I know police officers personally that have been engaged in situations like that and left the force because they couldn't handle it. So when you have to use lethal force like that, it stays with you the rest of your life. So, you know, this young officer, he did what he was trained to do. He had no other alternative in Charlotte.
That young officer on the force, 2 years, a graduate of Liberty University, criminal justice major, so he has experience. Brentley Vinson. His father was on the force. You got to believe that he is traumatized tonight. What goes through your mind post-shooting, taking someone's life, especially when you in your city where you live? You got people out on the street calling you a murderer and an executor.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It stays on your mind for a long period of time. What winds up happening is you start second guessing yourself. And you know what we tell officers, especially young officers, and I've told them this before, after a shooting, don't second guess yourself. You did what you had to do at the time based on the circumstances that you were confronted with, and just move on if you can. It's a very difficult thing for officers to have to deal with each and every day. Like I said, no police officer wants to take anybody's life. But sometimes, Eric, you know as well as I do, we're put in those situations where we have no other alternative. And last Thursday in Charlotte, that young officer had no other alternative.
Absolutely. The results being tragic, but all being under investigation as we continue our coverage tonight. Rod Wheeler, I thank you for your analysis, for being out on the streets and having this type of experience and bringing that with us this evening.
Good to talk to you, Eric.
Of course.
Very good. And we are coming up to midnight, to where a citywide curfew is about to go into effect about, 33 minutes from now.
Well, the city, of course, hoping for another peaceful night. Last night was finally fairly peaceful, and it looks like the same thing is going on this evening. Our special coverage of this situation will continue here on the Fox News Channel. There's been a tragic mall shooting about 1 hour north of Seattle. A gunman, we're told, is on the loose. This is happening right now in Burlington, Washington, where police say 4 people have been shot to death. This occurred at the Cascade Mall in Burlington. Police say the shooter has left the scene, was last seen walking toward I-15. Police, as you can see there, have been clearing the mall. We don't know what type of incident this could be, although the description, according to the Washington State Police, of this potential gunman is that he is a Hispanic male wearing some type of gray clothes, an Hispanic male, so clearly we don't know what type of crime this is, but we will bring you any latest details, of course, on this as soon as we get them.
Indeed. Okay, Eric, we turn back to Charlotte now, where protesters marching for a 4th straight night. This after the shooting death of 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott by Charlotte police this past Tuesday. Now, tonight's marchers are more peaceful than earlier in the week, and we go now to Fox News correspondent Steve Harrigan, who is on the ground there in Charlotte. So where are you now, Steve?
Arthel, we're outside the NASCAR Hall of Fame. They've been marching here for about 3.5 hours. Numbers not too large, about 400 to 500 people, but very energetic, chanting. Many times chanting, "Release the tapes." They want those police tapes released from the body camera and from the dashboard camera of that shooting. It's been a very peaceful night so far. There's been no damage of property, no looting. And from what we can see, no arrests at all. This is the second straight night there has been peace. There were widespread concerns earlier that because of the release of that very emotional tape, the dramatic shooting captured by Scott's wife, that there could be big numbers and possible violence tonight. That simply has not turned out to be the case tonight. About 400 to 500 strong, marching, chanting, and really in concert with the police. At one point, some of the marchers started to chant F the police, but other marchers shut that down quickly. We see police in bicycles in the front of the line, and then the marchers themselves. They've made several stops along the way, but no looting, no violence, no destruction of property. From what we can see so far, no arrests.
Okay, that's Steve Harrigan there live in the streets of Charlotte. Seems to be another peaceful night of protesting there. And joining us now is Steve Rogers. He's a retired detective from the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department. Steve is also a former member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force and a lieutenant commander with the Office of Naval Intelligence. And Steve, you just heard Steve Harrigan report that part of what the crowd is chanting there in the streets of Charlotte is release the tapes, release the tapes. They're talking about the body cam and the dash cam video from the police department there in Charlotte. Should those tapes be released?
They should have been released a few days ago, and a few days ago, obviously, they would be shown to the family of the victim before they release them publicly. And the reason why they should have released it earlier, because now we have a tape out there. And with that tape will come false narratives. We're hearing that the police, even on some of your competition, we're hearing guests saying that there's a possibility that the police planted the gun there. We're hearing there was no gun, etc., etc. So the police need to get that video out quickly and get the truth out quickly. That is what transparency is all about.
So, you know, part of the question then that some might ask, is it part of a cover-up by police or perhaps an effort not to compromise the investigation? How do you see it, Steve?
I absolutely believe it has nothing to do with a cover-up. There's always reasons not to regarding an investigation, but in this case, you got to look at the greater good. And the greater good is to protect the innocent people who live in that city, as well as the innocent police officers you're deploying out there to control what was a violent crowd. So look at the greater good. There's a video out there already. There's no reason not to release this soon.
And even the Charlotte mayor, Jennifer Roberts, is calling for the release of the tape, although the mayor earlier said, you know, her question was about timing of the release. And to your point, Steve, now that this video that is shot by the wife of Mr. Scott, Kia Scott, she shot that on her cell phone video, that's out there now. And of course, you heard Mike Tobin actually earlier talk about how that's already changing the narrative on the street, that people are believing that, you know, a gun was planted there. So I ask you again as an investigator now, how does this video that is out there, that for everyone to see, in fact, they were asking the protesters to watch the video and then take to the streets. I believe that part was happening in Atlanta, where they're also protesting this same shooting here in Charlotte. So how does the video posted by Mr. Scott's wife affect the investigation?
It won't affect it that greatly. I mean, I'm sure they're going to, meaning the authorities are going to look at that video and compare it to the video they have. But the problem we're facing is that the failure of the police department to release that tape is adding more fuel to the idea that there's a cover-up. And I don't believe for 1 minute there's a cover-up. But it's going to create a lot of problems in the next few days if they continue to delay the release of that video.
And what do you mean by that, Steve? Because right now the protesters are very peaceful. Do you think that perhaps that would change?
Oh, I believe it will change. I mean, if this false narrative continues to perpetrate, not only in Charlotte, but around the country, you know what happens. The radicals get out there. They now have a video of their own, and they're saying, look, we have this. Why aren't the police releasing what they would say is the truth? I believe the police version of it, but they've got to convince the people by releasing it.
Now, you say radicals, Steve. I'm sure Mrs. Rekia Scott, the 20-year wife of Mr. Scott, would not consider herself a radical for having released a video of the fatal shooting of her husband that she witnessed with her eyes as well as her cell phone.
Yeah, I'm not making reference to her. That poor woman had to face a very tragic situation. I'm talking about the looters, the people that started fires, that spit in the face of the police. I'm not even talking about the protesters. Those are fine people who live in that city. They came out, they protested, most of them went home. But when I make reference to radicals, I'm making reference to those individuals out on the streets who probably don't even live there, burning that city down and creating all these problems.
And again, they're peaceful there tonight in Charlotte, seem to be working in concert with police, per our Mike Tobin and Steve Harrigan, who are on the ground there in Charlotte. How long can the peaceful protest stay in place, stay intact, if you will, if that video is not released? And, you know, because as you said, it seems like the people of Charlotte, that they want to remain peaceful, that they want answers, but they don't want to burn down their own city. But you're right, that perhaps you do have agitators coming in from outside of Charlotte who could perhaps incite more violence. So, again, when do you think we'll see the release of this videotape from the police?
I hope sooner rather than later. And I've got to tell you, I give great credit to the peace and harmony that's going on down there, to the community leaders, the pastors, the church leaders, the ministers, along with the police department, are doing a superb job. But it's only going to be so far that they're going to be able to control the agitators. So release the tape sooner rather than later, and maybe we'll see this whole thing go away.
All right, Steve Rogers, thank you very much for joining us there. And, you know, Eric, Steve is saying that perhaps it's only so long that they can quell the agitators. But really, at some point, perhaps even the people of Charlotte who are trying their best to remain peaceful, they perhaps might get to the point where they can only take so much.
And it seems the numbers of the protesters have been going down, about 800 yesterday. About 400 roughly today, even though authorities, there were reports that some of these protesters came from out of town and from Charlotte. Upwards of, one report said 70%. We will see if that is indeed the case, as the protests at least are quiet for now and continue. Hillary Clinton was supposed to go to Charlotte on Sunday. She has now canceled that trip. We'll have the very latest on that. And the latest development out of Washington State, where 4 people, police say, have been shot to death at a mall. We don't know what type of incident that was, but we will bring you all the details as we get them.
Stay with us. And we have breaking news, a tragic mall shooting 1 hour north of Seattle. This is happening, live pictures here now in Burlington, Washington, where police say 4 people have been shot to death at the Cascade Mall. We are not sure exactly what type of incident this is, what started this. Police say the suspect is a Hispanic male, black hair, black shirt, 5'8" or 5'9", appears to be around anywhere from 20 to 25 years old. This is according to the Washington police there. Joining us now on the phone is Fox News correspondent Dan Springer from Seattle. Dan, what more can you tell us from your vantage point?
Well, I can tell you there's a massive manhunt for that suspect. And there's also one report that that suspect called police and has been in contact with police and threatening police in a phone call. We can't confirm that, but that's been a report out there that a person claiming to be the shooter called into police. Now, you described him as a Hispanic man, 5'8" or 5'9", black hair, black shirt, 20 to 25, light-skinned Hispanic male. We know that this happened around 7 o'clock at night. We know it happened near the Macy's, which is an enclosed part of the mall. The Cascade Mall is all enclosed, and Macy's is one of the anchor stores on one end. And we know that after the shots rang out, the customers were all put on lockdown, and just massive amount of police showed up on the scene. They quickly confirmed that 4 people were dead. We do not know how many others may be injured in the shooting, but EMS just got inside the mall, and they're going through right now to try to treat the other people who may be injured. We also know that police are still on the scene, going store to store, looking for any other possible shooters. But at this point, it looks like there's just one shooter in the mall, opening fire and killing at least 4 people inside that mall. Arthel?
And Steve, right now, Dan, I'm sorry, we don't know what started this, what prompted this, what is being described as a light-skinned Hispanic male, black hair, black shirt, 5'8" or 5'9", 20 to 25 years old. We don't know what prompted him to even start this killing spree, and you're saying that he called police. Did he say anything else to police that might have stood out?
I don't know exactly what he said to police, but witnesses say that after the shooting, he took off running towards I-5. Now, Interstate 5 runs all the way from the Canadian border down to Mexico. It's the main artery through the West Coast, and this mall sits right next to the highway. So he could have gotten into a vehicle there and he could be long gone. We just don't know. But this mall is just a stone's throw from Interstate 5.
And it's 8:44 currently on a Friday night. It's got to be a packed place. All right, Dan Springer, thank you for that update. And we'll have more on this breaking news story here on the Fox News channel all throughout tomorrow and tonight if necessary.
And we're also covering the situation back here on the East Coast, down in Charlotte and Atlanta, where the protests are continuing this evening. About 13 minutes from now, a citywide curfew will go into effect in Charlotte. Coming up, we'll have another live look and an examination of how this can potentially play into the presidential campaign, because you know the big debate is coming up on Monday night, and Hillary Clinton was supposed to go to Charlotte, but she canceled her visit. We'll have more here on the Fox News channel straight ahead. Back to the shooting of Keith Lamont Scott and the calls for Charlotte police to release those videos. You know, the police body cam and dash cam videos. Well, authorities were told are considering that. And one person calling for the release of those tapes is Hillary Clinton. She had planned to visit Charlotte on Sunday. Donald Trump, we're told, potentially going later on in the week. But the Clinton campaign has now announced that Mrs. Clinton is postponing her trip. That after Charlotte's mayor said authorities are just stretched too thin to deal with the presidential candidates at this time. For more on this, Jamu Green joins us. She was a campaign advisor for Hillary Clinton in 2008 and is a Fox News political analyst. Jamu, I mean, considering if authorities are considering releasing those tapes, I mean, potentially that could come over the weekend. You know what that means? That this issue would be front and center at the big debate on Monday night. How do you think this will impact that?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton certainly has put out a very specific criminal justice reform plan. She launched her campaign talking about this issue. But really, Eric, for me personally, I look at these situations and it feels so strongly that when we are facing this as a country, now is not the time for us to retreat to our usual political corners. And one of the reasons why I don't think these issues have been dealt with effectively is that we only talk about them at the height of the controversy or the drama and in isolated situations. We need to be talking about the relationship and rebuilding trust between police officers and the African American community when there isn't a police shooting, when it isn't going to be a part of the debate, and talking about the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing and the recommendations they have made. I do know, of course, that a question or a series of questions will be asked on Monday of both candidates, and I hope they proceed with their answers in a responsible way. I really do hope, especially Mr. Trump, will be able to do that.
You hit that on the head, and earlier Bill O'Reilly said he believes that what he said with the riots will help Donald Trump in North Carolina. But you've hit upon something that is so much, really something that is so meaningful. How do we restore trust? I mean, you got the people out in the street tonight. They think that gun was planted. They don't think there was a gun there. They think no matter what authorities say, they're full of it and they're spinning it. They even think that the protester, Mr. Justin Carr, who is out there expressing the freedom of right to speech that this country protects us. This poor young man was shot to death, allegedly by another protester. And those protesters think that it was a rubber bullet fired by the cops. How do you restore trust, both on the street and by other people who feel in danger?
Well, Eric, I think certainly transparency is a word that has been used a lot, not just in this situation, but others. And I think we have to start looking at the cities that are getting it right, and not just, again, the incidents where something goes wrong or there's excessive force. Look at Dallas, and when we had the police shootings down there, one of the parts of that conversation that really didn't come through was that Dallas was really getting it right. I think compare the two situations we've seen in this past week, how the community was really provided information from the Tulsa Police Department. There was transparency. There was quick action taken. The investigation moved through very quickly, and there were peaceful protests. Compare that to Charlotte, where this tape has not been released. And I've seen, lots of news coverage of this. People on the left, on the right, in the middle, all calling on this police department to release the tape. And the protesters themselves, that are now in a few minutes going to have to face this curfew, calling for the release of this tape. That, as a start, immediate transparency, where it doesn't look like there's something that you're trying to hide, where it doesn't look like there's a cover-up, I think would go a long ways.
Authorities are saying they're considering that. They're going back and forth over the legalities, and what we have been told so far is that in a police investigation, they're concerned that witnesses could be tainted, for example, and usually they don't release this information during an investigation. But do you think we would have gone this far, if some of those tapes, had been released? We're in a different age now. We're in an age with social media where you can stream a police killing when you're sitting next to your husband or your boyfriend, when you got it on social media, when Mr. Scott's wife comes out with her cell phone and tapes the actual horrendous killing of her husband, no matter what the situation was. Do you think authorities have recognized that and have responded appropriately in Charlotte?
Look, I have a lot of faith in the skills of our police officers around the country, and specifically in Charlotte. You look at the shooting of Justin Carr, the protester, 2 nights ago. The police were able to run a successful investigation and now have an arrest in that killing, and they used video evidence to do that in just a matter of days. Now, it's been more days since the shooting of Keith Lamont Scott, and what the difference is between Justin Carr, who was shot, in the video evidence that was used in that investigation, and this police shooting is that who was involved in it. I have not seen a credible answer, and I don't think the protesters and anyone who's watching this situation unfold and really wanting healing to happen between communities and police departments, we've not seen a credible answer for why this tape cannot be released, especially now that we see a tape from the family.
I understand that by saying who was involved in it. You're referring to the fact that one was a protester, and you think that the police are trying to, block this because the shooting of Mr. Scott was police involved?
I think that when it is a police-involved shooting, we see the efforts for transparency in many cases take a lot longer. And as you said, we live in a different media age now, but we also, have very skilled police officers out there who I think in a much shorter period of time, even if it is a police officer involved shooting, should be able to manage these investigations in a way that is responsible responsible to the community, responsible to the families of the victim involved, and also will be responsible to the healing that must
Jimmy,
occur.
I've got to stop you. You're out of time. Come up at the top of the hour. I thank you for your insight and analysis, and we'll see if those tapes are released like they were so quickly in Tulsa, in Charlotte.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.
And that is going to do it for our coverage here of the protest there in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you so much for joining us.